So are you an Orthodox Christian who is interested in learning Byzantine chanting, but maybe you're not sure where to start? So, for those new to my channel, my name is Nathan and I make videos about Byzantine chanting, and I teach Byzantine chanting online. I teach lessons. But this video is for those who are interested in teaching themselves how to chant. So, you don't necessarily have to take lessons, you can teach yourself how to chant. And this video is about how to do that in the most efficient way. So, a lot of people kind of get it wrong as far as the foundation of learning to chant, because they focus a lot on the notation primarily. But the notation is only good if you have the correct foundation. So I want to go through basically some steps that you can follow to learn Byzantine chanting. The first step is just familiarizing yourself with Byzantine music. This is the first thing you should do, because the reality is Byzantine music is very, very different from Western music, and many times there are musicians, let's say, who have a background in Western music, maybe opera, maybe contemporary music, and they want to learn how to chant. The very first thing you should do is just familiarize yourself with Byzantine chanting. And really the best way to do this is, if you live near a monastery, I would visit that monastery and listen to the chanting there. The monasteries tend to have very good chanters, and the chanting in the monasteries is usually a very good example of Byzantine chanting, especially if you live near one of Elder Ephraim's monasteries. I would really suggest going to one of those. And of course, in a parish, you can also, there are many parishes with very good chanters, but it's a bit more, you never know. But if you visit a monastery, there's a lot more of a guarantee that what you're going to hear, especially if it's one of Elder Ephraim's monasteries, what you're going to hear is going to be a lot more traditional, a lot more authentic. So if there's a monastery near you, definitely go visit. And you can also listen to chanting with, YouTube is really the best place. So you want to look at Byzantine chanting on YouTube and find something that you like. Just familiarize yourself with Byzantine chanting in general and listen to some recordings on YouTube. And this will build the correct foundation, because what you'll notice is that Byzantine chanting sounds very different than Western music. And if you're used to Western music, maybe even if you're trained in Western music, this is the first thing that's going to take some getting used to. After you have a general idea of what this type of music sounds like, you want to basically find a specific style that you like within Byzantine music, because within Byzantine music you'll notice there are various what we would call schools or styles of chanting. So for example, there's the patriarchal style, which is a lot more elaborate and a bit more showy, I guess. It's what you're going to find in the big cathedrals and that type of thing. And then kind of on the other side, you're going to find the sort of the Mount Athos style, which is a bit more, I would say, a bit more calming and mellow, maybe a bit more elongated, right? On Mount Athos, they're going to have a lot longer services. Things are going to be stretched out a bit more. And you have to find what resonates with you, what you enjoy listening to. For me, it's the Mount Athos style, right? So I named my online school, after Petros Philanthidis, who was a chanter on Mount Athos, because I love the Mount Athos style. But you have to find a style that you enjoy. And then once you find that, even a specific channel, once you find that specific channel, really listen to that specific chant or that specific chanter as much as you can to just, like I said, continue to familiarize yourself with those hymns and with the specific style. At this point, you probably have even memorized some simple hymns if you've been listening to a lot of hymns, a lot of recordings, and you've probably noticed the distinction of the 8 tones. So you can probably recognize what does tone 1 sound like, tone 2, tone 3, etc. So you should be able to kind of differentiate those different tones. You'll probably notice there's different styles, different types of hymns. Some are slower paced, some are faster paced, and so on. So you've familiarized yourself with this stuff. At this point, now you want to start looking into the notation. See, the mistake some people make is they get right into learning the notation. They go, and I think a lot of schools, chanting schools, do this too. They get right into learning Byzantine notation and the scales and all that stuff. But if your only music experience is in, Western music or opera or something like, or theater or contemporary music, then you don't have the right foundation to learn the notation, in my opinion. But now that you have the right foundation, now that you've followed the first step, which is basically familiarize yourself with the notation, familiarize yourself with Byzantine chanting, and secondly, find a specific style that you like and continue listening to it. Now you can learn the basics of the notation. So the first thing you would want to learn is the scale. We would start with the diatonic scale, which is, for Western musicians, it's basically like the C scale. It just uses these Greek note names, ni, pa, vu, ga, li, and so on. And there are a lot of resources online where you can kind of learn this stuff. And after you learn the scale, you want to memorize the scale. This is what I tell my students. Everything I'm telling you here, I tell my students the same thing. So with my students, first we would learn the scale. We would want to memorize the scale. It's best, through a recording. I'll always send them a recording of the scale. And then you want to learn, once you've memorized the scale, you want to start learning the basic symbols. So like I've said in previous videos, Byzantine notation is a very different notation system compared to Western notation. And you're going to have various symbols telling you where to go as far as intervals. So there's a lot of different symbols. It's like learning a language. It's going to be like up 1 note, up 2 notes, down 3 notes. There's a lot of different symbols. So you want to learn those symbols and just develop a basic understanding of those symbols. And learn to do paralayi. And I'm sure many of you have heard this term. There's a lot of an emphasis on doing paralayi in most chanting schools. They'll tell you to just do it paralayi a bunch of times. It's kind of accurate, but also kind of not as necessary as they make it to be. So I'll explain. But you want to know how to do paralayi, and you want to practice it. So if you've learned the scale, and you've learned the basic symbols, and you've done a little bit of paralayi, you want to move on to step 4, which is basically going back to the recordings. Go back to that YouTube channel, go back to that source and make sure it's a good source, right? Make sure it's somebody who's well known, well respected, and listen to their recordings, and make sure that, in this case, they basically have the notation written in their recordings, on their videos. So they should have videos, and these, I make videos like this too, where you have the video, you have the chanting, the hymn being chanted, and you have the notation up there on the screen for whatever hymn is being chanted. So basically you can follow along. And that is step 4. So now that you've learned the notation somewhat, you can follow along with the recording. And you'll start to recognize, you'll start to be able to follow along with the chanter, with what he is chanting, and you'll be able to recognize the notation, right? Because you know the basic symbols. This is the best way to familiarize yourself with the notation. This is better than doing paralagi, in fact. Because why is that? Because first of all, you're going to hear in real time, you're going to hear how the chanter interprets the hymn in the recording. So you're going to hear a few different things. You're going to hear, first of all, what we would call the melodic patterns. So in Byzantine music, there's a lot of very repetitive, predictable phrases and patterns that the notation has. And when you listen to the recordings and follow along, you're going to be able to pick up on that. So you're basically learning the notation in a much more intuitive way. So when you see a hymn, when you see music without a recording, and you're going to chant it, you're going to be able to recognize certain patterns, and you're going to know exactly what they sound like without even having to think about it, because you've heard it so many times, because these patterns are very predictable. And I'd have to show some examples for you to see what I mean, but if you follow these steps, you'll start to notice that there are indeed a lot of predictable patterns. So it's like if I'm driving on the highway and I'm looking at the road, and on the side there's a big billboard that says bananas for sale. I can not even look at the sign. I can see the sign from the corner of my eye that says bananas for sale, and I'll know that that's what it said. I'll know it says bananas for sale without even having to read it, because I just see it from the corner of my eye, and I know the English language so well. I'm so familiar with it. It's intuitive, it's internalized, that I don't even need to look at it. So that's how some of these melodic phrases and the way the notation is written, that's how it's going to start to feel for you if you get used to following along with recordings. And then another benefit of this is you can hear how the chanter executes or interprets the music in general. Because here's the thing, there are some things about Byzantine notation that you cannot learn from a textbook. It's explained in textbooks, but it's very hard to implement or to understand. So in a textbook, it's easy to understand what we would call the quantitative symbols, right? So symbols telling you where to go. It's very easy to learn up 4 notes, up 5 notes, whatever. But when it comes to ornamentations and embellishments and interpretation, a lot of textbooks will explain this stuff, but really you need to hear it in order to understand it. So that's a good part about listening to recordings, is you're going to be able to hear how the chanter actually executes the ornamentations. And that's very important. What was I going to say? And another thing is every chanter will kind of do it slightly differently, but if you've picked a sort of style that you enjoy, then learn from that. So you'll start to pay attention, like I said, to these melodic patterns in the recordings that you're listening to. And this is going to be very helpful. Now, if you do have a teacher, it's a little bit different. Like I said, with my students, since I have them with me online, of course it's through Zoom, but I can give them immediate feedback while they are doing paralagi. So with my students, we will pick a hymn to work on, and I'll always ask them to do paralagi, to work on the hymn using paralagi. And by the way, paralagi just means singing the hymn with the note names, kind of like solfege or whatever. So we'll work on it with paralagi and also with the words, or as we would call the melos, just chanting it with the words. And that's good because I'm right there, right, giving them immediate feedback. And on top of that, I'll demonstrate to them a lot of the common melodic patterns, a lot of the things that they're going to see very often in the music, and I'll demonstrate to them how it sounds so they can just learn right there. And same thing with the qualitative symbols, the ornamentations, I will demonstrate to them. I will show them how it sounds. And I also send them recordings. I'll send them recordings of the hymns so they can follow along. But if you don't have a teacher, it's going to be way easier and it's going to save you a lot of time if you spend a lot of time following along with recordings of other chanters, because you won't have that immediate feedback. If you're just doing paralagi by yourself, you won't have that immediate sort of feedback as if you had a teacher right there. So if you do it this way, it's really going to save you a lot of time. So at this point, you should have a pretty good understanding of the various modes, how they sound, and the notation, and how the notation works, and also how to read the notation, how to interpret it practically. At this point, you can start to learn different scales, right? So I assume you've learned the diatonic scale at this point. You can start to learn the hard chromatic. I would start with the hard chromatic because it's very different from the diatonic. And then you can learn the soft chromatic. So the soft chromatic is kind of similar to diatonic, but with a few differences. And then there's the enharmonic. There's a few different types of enharmonic. The general main type of enharmonic scale is where the zo is flat. So you can learn that. And once you've learned the scales, this is when paralagi is helpful. So once you've learned a new scale, let's say the hard chromatic scale, then you go to chant a hymn in hard chromatic. Of course, you can always follow along with recordings and stuff, and that's always helpful. But at this point, if you've learned a new scale, you will want to do paralagi with that hymn, so you can make sure you're getting all of the notes right. And it's very important to memorize these scales. And I would do that, and the way I teach my students to memorize scales is just to send them a recording. And what I tell them, the same thing I'm going to tell you, is just take that recording and listen to it just all day long. If you're driving, if you're eating, whatever, just have it playing in the back. Even if you don't give it your full undivided attention all the time, it's okay. Just have it playing in the back. And what that's going to do is you're going to internalize it. You're going to memorize it. And once you've memorized the scale, it's going to be a lot easier for you to just chant something using that scale, to do paralagi. And of course, you're going to want to learn, there's a lot to learn. You're going to want to learn the flores, the martirias, and all of that stuff. And I briefly explain some of these things in my videos. I briefly explained, I think, flores, and I'm gonna make more videos. But once you've learned all of these things, then once you've done all of these things and followed all these steps, you've made a lot of progress in learning Byzantine chanting. And at this point, this is for those, to clarify, those who are basically teaching themselves, who are learning on their own. I'm trying to save you time. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for you. So at this point, you want to just keep following along with recordings and challenge yourself. Challenge yourself to learn new hymns and new scales. And my suggestion is to always check yourself and make sure, if you think what you're doing, maybe you're not sure if it's correct, find a hymn online from a source that you trust that uses that specific scale or that specific mode that you're working on. See how they do it in the recording, and then you can see if you're doing it right. That's the thing, when you don't have a teacher, you don't have that immediate feedback. so you need to have another source to look at. And from there, you could just keep challenging yourself, just keep trying to learn new things. And if you do this, I think you can learn Byzantine chanting and familiarize yourself with it and become very good at it in a very short period of time, rather than doing, paralagi 2,000 times, as the saying goes, or whatever they say. You should do paralagi, but you should also internalize this type of music and become very familiar with it, so that even if you don't have notation with you, you still know how this type of thing is supposed to sound, and you can just chant things even off the top of your head. And continue listening to recordings. Like I said, while you're driving, while you're eating, just keep listening and let it sink into your head and become second nature. So that's how you teach yourself Byzantine chanting. And if you want to learn from me, if you're interested in working with me, you can give it a try for free. Just click the link in the description. And, I have students from all types of levels of knowledge, all different ages, mostly busy people, right? People that are in school, young people especially are in school, older people that are working, or maybe just have busy lives in general, and maybe they don't have time for meeting, exactly at certain days and certain times. Maybe they want to meet once a month, maybe they want to meet twice a week, or anything in between. Whatever you want to do, whatever works best for you. My teaching style is very flexible to all different types of people, and I know everybody learns differently. Maybe you might take a little bit longer to learn a certain scale. There's no rush, there's no deadlines when you're working with me. So if you're interested in giving it a try for free, click the link in the description.